All right, what's going on, everyone? I'm here for the RotoPros Pre-Lock Show for the main slate tonight. By myself, doing this one solo. Let's see, waiting on some people to join. All right, I think we've got enough to start. So, we've got some really weird pitching for tonight's slate. Garrett Cole is the most expensive pitcher, and I think he's fine to target, but he's actually not going to be my favorite pitcher to use. And part of the problem is just the offenses that we have going on. So Cole costs 12,300. He's at home against the Padres. I think Cole is a very good pitcher. I think he's probably a little bit overrated. It was a high-profile trade, the Astros acquiring him, but Cole kind of was more of like a number 2, maybe a number 3 starter last year. Lance McCullers was definitely better than him, and McCullers was cheaper than this yesterday. So Cole actually only struck out 8.7 hitters per 9 innings. His career rate is 8.5. Walks are in the mid-2s. His ERA for the year was 4.26, FIP and xFIP around 4. I mean, Cole is good, but he certainly is not ace level. And I think if you're paying 12,300 for a pitcher, either it has to be a really, really good matchup, which this is, or it has to be a really good pitcher, or both. But the problem is just lineup construction. It's not going to really work fitting Cole in, and that's because we have a Coors game for the first time this season. So I think use Garrett Cole where he fits, but I don't think that's going to be in a lot of places. So looking at these other pitching choices, I think on first glance, it doesn't look very promising, but there are a few kind of under the radar names that definitely warrant some consideration. And I think I'll just start with the Vegas line movement because it'll give a pretty good indication of which pitchers are the ones to target. So the most significant line movement we're seeing so far is the A's open as plus 110 underdogs against the Angels in Anaheim. They're actually up to minus 115 favorites, and all of that is against the public. The pitching matchup we're looking at is Andrew Triggs against JC Ramirez. And most of this line movement is probably because JC Ramirez is really bad. He was bad in his first start. I think his velocity was down a little bit. But the A's offense is good. It's probably comparable to the Angels offense, at least in terms of upside. Like, there is a lot of power on both teams. I think both are decent offenses. Maybe the Angels are a little bit better. They do have Mike Trout. But JC Ramirez last year, 4.15 ERA, probably overrates him a bit. His FIP was 4.71, xFIP 4.52, 6.4 Ks per 9, and he gave up a ton of home runs. So the A's have a lot of upside against Ramirez, and I'll get to that for offense. But the other side of that sharp money is that Andrew Triggs, I think, has a chance to be a really good pitcher this year, or at least an above-average pitcher. He was sort of okay last year, and he doesn't get a ton of swinging strikes, but for whatever reason, he gets a lot of strikeouts. At least to start the year, he had 6 in 5 innings. Actually, I think it was 7 in 5 innings. But Triggs gets a lot of chases on pitches out of the zone, and he got a lot of strikeouts out of the bullpen in 2016. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to project him to get too many Ks this year, but I do think that there's some decent upside for him. He's not one of my favorite pitching options, but this is the strongest Vegas line indicator. And I think it's because maybe 75% of it is pro A's offense and 25% of it is pro Andrew Triggs. So that's the strongest Vegas line movement here. The one that's more relevant for pitching choice, though, we have some pretty bad weather in the, what game was it? The Texas-Toronto game. I think it's going to be around 30 or 40 degrees, just pulling up the forecast here. Looks like right around 40 degrees, but it should be windy. It's going to be pretty cold. Just looking at some of the other info on the weather, according to the Roto Grinders, it's supposed to be dense air, which I guess doesn't make the ball fly very far. So, and Texas also plays as more of a hitter's park in the summer anyway. So this is maybe a neutral park the way it's playing tonight, if not a negative park. And Mike Minor is definitely just better than people think. But as far as the Vegas line, the Blue Jays were up to about minus 130 favorites, and they've now dropped, let's see how far they've dropped now, minus 120 or so. But the over-under was 9.5 to open, and it's actually almost all the way down to 8. So we've seen over a full run of reverse line movement on the under because the public's about split on the over under. So still over a run off the total, certainly a good indication that the weather is going to have an effect here. But Mike Minor has been kind of just inconsistent his whole career, but he's dealt with a number of injuries. Last year, though, he was healthy, and in 65 bullpen appearances, he averaged over 10 strikeouts per 9 innings, 2.5 walks per 9 innings, 2.55 ERA, and doesn't really look like it was that lucky, maybe a little bit inflated by luck. Batting average on balls in play was a little bit better than average. His first start of the year, he made it home against the Astros, and he ended up being charged for, let's see, it was 2 runs in 4 2/3 innings. I think one of those was an inherited runner that the bullpen let in. But Minor had 5 strikeouts in that game, 2 walks, and he got swing and misses on a pretty alarmingly high number of pitches. 12.9% swinging strike rate for the game, 11.8% last year. And it does look like on the surface that Minor had a velocity drop on opening day, but he was in the bullpen last year, and generally relievers throw harder. So I think the better way to look at Mike Minor's velocity is to compare him to the last time he was a starting pitcher. And Minor's last full season as a starter was all the way back in 2014. And in that season, he was throwing, well, actually, that was the season he got hurt, but it was almost a full season. Around that time in his career, though, from 2010 to 2014, Minor was sitting 90 to 91 on average. On his opening day start, he was almost at 93, 92.5 average fastball velocity. So Minor's throwing harder as a starting pitcher now than he did when he was a starter earlier in his career. And even though it's lower velocity than it was in the bullpen, he should be a little less effective. He still figures to be pretty good this year. The only real knock on him is that he's probably very injury prone, but that doesn't matter if we're just talking about one day. We're just trying to get him to have a good game tonight. It's fine if he gets injured later in the season. I guess we want good things for Mike Minor, but I really only care about him for tonight's game, at least at this point. So there's a lot of reason to like him. The Blue Jays offense is okay. It's not great. I do think they're going to be pretty popular because they've been so good recently. So there's potentially a lot of leverage there if the public is heavy on the Toronto side of the game. And it looks like they kind of will be, especially the righties, especially Josh Donaldson. Mike Minor's a good pitcher, and the line movement supports him. He's a slight underdog, but I think Texas should probably be a small favorite here. So he's going to be my favorite pitcher on the slate, which I think is a strange choice generally, but I think it's a really good spot for him. And I guess I should mention his price too, because that's what we care about. Minor is only priced at $6,000 on DraftKings. So very cheap. You don't need him to do too much to hit value. And I think there's pretty big upside for him too. The last thing I'll say on him is I don't know exactly how long of a leash he'll have in terms of pitch count, because he does have this injury track record. But the Rangers signed him to be a starting pitcher. They're intent on having him start games. I mean, maybe he's limited to 85 to 90 pitches or something like that. But I still think he's cheap enough where that's okay. And if he's pitching well, he probably stays in the game longer. So the floor could be low, but I think it probably is a lot higher than people think. I think there is a ceiling here, even with a potential pitch limit. And the strikeouts should be there. So Mike Minor is my favorite pitcher on the slate. I think Cole could be the guy I use the second most, just where he fits. And then let's see what we got here. As always, if there are questions, you can post them on Slack for people in Slack. Jordan, that's not a question, but thank you. Yeah, YouTube is a good spot for actual questions also. Let's see. So for other pitching choices, it's going to get a little bit quirky here. I think Sal Romano makes some sense. Romano is not very good. He was not very good last year. And I'm just going to move this around to get some of the glare out. Okay, better. Romano is just really cheap, and he throws hard, and the weather in Pittsburgh tonight looks pretty brutal. So it could be favorable for him. Yeah, I think we're looking at temperatures in the 20s. So that's pretty good for Sal Romano. The Pirates offense is not that good. It's already a pitcher's park. And I think we're looking at just potentially an average pitcher, a slightly below average pitcher who could have some strikeout upside because it is a National League game. He's facing a pitcher in the batting order. It's hard to say much about how good Romano could be. He doesn't have much of a track record. He's only thrown 93 career innings, and they've kind of just been below average. Part of the reason for that is because he usually pitches in Cincinnati, though, which is a hitter's park. So this is a boost in environment, and I think he's just cheap enough where he makes sense, and we're going to need cheap pitching to be able to fit some of these offenses in, especially the Coors Field game. So that price tag was $5,800. Definitely prefer Minor for that price, but I also think Romano has some leverage actually against the opposing pitcher because Chad Kuhl should be pretty popular at 7,200. For some reason, there was this like huge run last year where people just rostered Chad Kuhl a lot. He was really chalky for like late summer, early fall for like several starts. I don't really understand why. He pitched well a couple times. I guess he limits runs sometimes, but usually he just doesn't stay in the game for more than 4 innings because he gets some strikeouts and he also walks everybody. And even when balls are getting put in play, it's usually not until late in the count when it's 3-2 already, and he's really just racked up a ton of pitches. So I have no interest in Kuhl, but I do think people are going to use him. And if Romano ends up getting the win, that means Chad Kuhl doesn't get the win. So I think it's a good counter to people who are using Chad Kuhl. And I actually think he could be the highest owned pitcher on the slate outside of Garrett Cole. I still think most people will pay up for Garrett Cole, but I think Chad Kuhl could be the number 2 guy. So I do like Romano as a hedge against Kuhl, and no Chad Kuhl for me. So what else do we have here? Andrew Triggs, who I mentioned before, I think warrants some consideration, but he's a little pricey. So I'll say for now, he's my number 4 choice in terms of how much I'll use of him. I'm going to get to the A's offense, and Triggs correlates at least for his win bonus with the A's offense. But it's 7,700. I think that Minor is a much better choice. I think I'd rather just try to pay up for Garrett Cole where I can. And I'd probably rather just take the savings and use Sal Romano. But Andrew Triggs is a favorite in his game, so 7,700 I think is okay. He could get some strikeouts. Tough matchup, but maybe he's worth having a slight amount of exposure to. Not too much, though. All right, offense time. Let's see what we got for offenses. So I'll start with the Coors game, just because it's the most obvious spot. Both pitchers are pretty bad, but especially Anibal Sanchez. I guess Chad Bettis might be league average or so, but the Braves have an okay offense, and the game's in Colorado. They'll probably do fairly well against Chad Bettis, I would think. So the Braves side of the game, they're cheaper than the Rockies. Freddie Freeman is very expensive. He's 5,800. I would guess that's the highest price tag that he'll have the entire season. And I think that's true for a lot of players that will play in Coors. I still want some Freddie Freeman exposure, but I think if I'm paying that much, I'd rather have the Rockies side. No real issue with Freeman, though. I mean, it's such a boost playing in Coors Field. Maybe this is just a fair price for him. I'll certainly have some Brave stacks, and he'll be in most of them, maybe all of them. I would say I'm kind of indifferent on the Braves, though. I think if you have a lot of lineups, include some Brave stacks. If you have just a couple lineups, I think that they're fadeable just because of how expensive they are. But they do have a couple value plays. Kurt Suzuki, a catcher, 3,200 for anyone playing catcher at Coors Field. I think that's usable. Preston Tucker, 3,900. I mean, that's a lot more than he was costing the first week of the season, but he wasn't playing at Coors Field the first week of the season. So I think Tucker, 3,900 is fine. I think Ender Inciarte at 4,500 is fine. Albies is fine. Maybe Nick Markakis 4,100. But value plays, I think it's Tucker, Suzuki for the most part. I think some stacks from the Braves side are okay to have. The Rockies side looks very intriguing because Anibal Sanchez is bad. He's old, so he's probably getting worse. He's very home run prone, and the Braves don't have a particularly good bullpen. So there is a ton of upside for the Rockies tonight, which I guess is always the case when they play at home. Not the case when they play anywhere else. But the Rockies have a ton of upside tonight. And starting with Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado. Well, I'll just address this first. Minor, Triggs, Cole, Romano. I think those, yeah, I don't think I'll have any exposure to anyone else. And I think the order for it would be Minor, then Cole, then Romano, then Triggs. But Minor will be the one that I have by far the most, I think, at least for now. I'll mention FanDuel too. I think using Garrett Cole to pay up for on FanDuel, he's cheaper there. I think that makes the most sense. I would still have some Mike Minor mixed in on FanDuel, but Cole is he's a much easier choice on FanDuel. So this is for DraftKings, with Minor being the highest exposure pitcher for me. But back to the Rockies. I mean, Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado are very expensive, but like I said, this is a ridiculously easy matchup. Tons of upside. So 5,900 and 5,600 for them. I'm fine with eating that salary. It's okay, I guess. There is a little bit of value on the Rockies though, just across the board. Gerardo Parra is 3,600. I mean, that's just really cheap for anyone playing in Coors. Like I said with the Braves, Cargo is 4,700, batting fourth. I think that's a solid play. LeMahieu, it's whatever for DJ LeMahieu at 4,900. I guess use him in stacks, but don't use him elsewhere. I'll probably be avoiding Ian Desmond at 5,200. That's a pretty ridiculous price tag for him. And then Story against righties, not much interest. Chris Iannetta, maybe include him in a couple stacks. But I think even though there's so much expected output here, I probably am more looking to stack cheaper offenses and plug in the Coors game rather than just stack the Coors game. Also, even with cheap pitching, it's going to be pretty hard to stack the Coors game. So I would say do some of it, but I don't want every lineup I make to be a Coors stack, because then also you probably are stuck with having Mike Minor and Sal Romano in every one of your lineups. And while I do think those guys are good values, I don't really think I want to have 100% of either of them. Although maybe Mike Minor, but I'm not looking at 100% Sal Romano tonight. So other offenses, I mentioned the A's, and I think they could be my favorite value. JC Ramirez is definitely awful. The line movement strongly supports the A's being the right side of the game from a value perspective, because they're actually much cheaper than the Angels, and now they're favored in the game. So on that alone, there's odds value. The A's are it's just kind of crazy to look at how cheap they are. I mean, Chris Davis, 4,800, I think is a good play. I won't say he's like my favorite play, and I probably won't plug him into other lineups, but certainly fine with him for stacks. And everyone else on the team is like, I mean, I want to have as much of them as possible. So Matt Olson, 4K against a terrible right-handed pitcher. I think that's a really good play. Jed Lowry's 3,100, Marcus Semien, 33, Mountjoy's 31. That's been their first three guys in the batting order for most of the games this year. So assuming they do that again, those could be my top three hitters that I have exposure to tonight. I think it's a really strong spot for all of them. Strangely, Matt Chapman is actually the most expensive A's player on FanDuel. Let me just double check that, because I kind of had a double take there when I saw that for the first time. He's not that expensive on DraftKings. He's 3.5. I think he's fine to use on DraftKings. But yeah, Chapman is 3,800 on FanDuel, and Davis and Olsen are 37 and 36. I'm probably fading Matt Chapman on FanDuel. He's a fine hitter, but that's just I don't understand that price. For DraftKings though, fine with Chapman, fine with whoever ends up being at the bottom of the A's order, because it's just a good matchup for them. And also all of them are cheap. So no one specific that I'm interested in outside of those guys. I mean, if Stephen Piscotty bats sixth or something, or fifth, maybe they move him way up, then he could become a really good value play too. But for now, I think I'm mixing in guys like Lucroy, Piscotty, Boog Powell. I think they're all just okay. Use them in game stacks. But the real value in this game is Joyce, Semien, Lowry, and definitely Matt Olson. That's just way too cheap for Matt Olson's home run upside. He hit one yesterday. He hasn't been that great to start the year, but probably one of the best young home run hitters in the league. He should be getting better. So I like Matt Olson a lot. I think that might be mostly it for offense. Like, I don't think it's an awful spot for the Blue Jays righties against Mike Minor. Although Mike Minor actually hasn't had platoon splits really. He didn't last year as a reliever. I'm going to double check that also. But the Blue Jays are just kind of expensive. So if I was using anyone from them, it probably would be Steve Pearce leading off, although he's 3,400. He was cheaper than that yesterday. Solarte's price has gone up. I think Aledmus Diaz at shortstop for 2,900 makes sense. But yeah, I'm just not crazy about the Blue Jays being so expensive, and I'm also not crazy about the matchup. But I will give Mike Minor splits in just a second. It actually looks like he gave up a lot more hard contact to lefties last year, but his overall numbers were better against lefties. He was good against righties too, though. Against righties, 9.2 Ks per nine, 2.5 walks per nine, 328 FIP, 413 xFIP. It was like a 24% hard contact rate against righties last year. He was better than that against lefties, except in terms of hard contact, almost 13 Ks per nine against left-handed batting. 12.2. Okay. Yeah, almost 13, like I said. But Minor's good, and I think the Blue Jays are too pricey, so I'm off them. I think everything's kind of just fairly priced on the Rangers side of the game. Marcus Stroman against Texas. Stroman's 9,700. I didn't really mention him. He could be semi-popular too because Marco Estrada had success in Texas yesterday. I think it's a little too expensive for Stroman. The Rangers do have some cheap hitters. Joey Gallo is not one of them. He's 4,300, but I think he's okay. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, Adrian Beltre was just announced out of the lineup. So that could change some things. I still don't think I like Stroman, but it could move around some guys in the Texas batting order. So Rougned Odor is now batting second. 3,000 for him. I mean, I don't particularly like Odor as a hitter, but number two hitters that cost 3,000 don't have to be that good to be worth using. So I think Odor is fine. Andrews is fine. Shu is fine. Mazzara is fine. All of them are in the 3,000s. Jerkson Profar is in the starting lineup. He's 2,500. I guess he may be okay. Actually, everyone from 6 through 9 in the Rangers order is under 3,000. So I don't know. It's a cheap, definitely contrarian stack if you want to do it, and there's correlation with Mike Minor's win bonus. I would say I'm going to do very little of it, though. There's just not a ton of expected output here, and the only reason I'm not on Stroman's side of the game is just his price. Like, if I'm going to pay that much, I'd rather just pay all the way up for Garrett Cole. I don't think Stroman really fits in lineup construction-wise tonight. And that's really it. The only other game to talk about is the Astros game. So not on the Padres side. Garrett Cole is fine as a pitcher. The Astros have a good bullpen too, so that really limits the upside for San Diego. We could see like Chris Davinsky, Brad Peacock, someone who's good in the bullpen actually comes in all the time for the Astros, even when the starter struggles. So even for cheap prices, no interest in the Padres. And then the Houston side of the game. So I don't really know what to make of Brian Mitchell. I know that Greg and I talked about him before his first start, and I don't think he's very good, but the Astros are also expensive, and if I'm going to pay that much, I'd rather just use the Colorado game. And also, Mitchell may just not pitch for very long because he has been a reliever in the past. He was a reliever with the Yankees last year, and the Padres have a decent bullpen. They have a lot of depth there. So the Astros could just be facing bullpen guys most of the game, and could be some lefties. It'll make it worse on their left-handed hitters, and it just – I don't think you're going to see a full game of Brian Mitchell, but the Astros certainly have some expected output. They have some upside. It's just the pricing for me. Like the difference between Jose Altuve at 5,600 and Nolan Arenado at 5,600. I mean, Arenado is facing probably a similar quality pitcher, but he's in Coors Field. I know it's a different position, but I'd rather not pay that for Altuve. Springer's 5K, Correa's 4,900. I mean, again, Josh Reddick 4,000. I think it's fine. And I think that's probably it for Houston. I think the prices are just a little out of hand. Fading the Pirates with the weather conditions. I was looking to see if potentially Billy Hamilton was leading off for the Reds tonight because he's certainly not dependent on home runs for his production. He never hits any of them. And Chad Kuhl is very walk prone. So if he could get on base, then could be a lot of stolen base upside. But Hamilton is not in the lineup. Jesse Winker actually is, and he's leading off. Winker steals some bases too, and he's only 2,900, so that's really cheap for a leadoff hitter. I think Winker's a good value play, and then I think you can play Votto or Jeanette or Duvall. Votto's always worth playing. He's just really, really good at baseball, and Jeanette and Duvall are cheap. So Chad Kuhl throws hard, but he also is pretty bad, and I think there is some upside for the Reds, even though the park conditions are not very good. And then, like I mentioned before, Chad Kuhl could be pretty chalky on this slate. So maybe there's some leverage there for the red side of the game. That seems to be it. Doesn't look like we have any more questions. So you guys are going to let me off the hook. And all right, yeah, I'll sign off now. So for anyone who watched or anyone who hasn't watched yet, but I guess they'll hear me saying this when they watch, thanks for listening. And you can find all of our stuff at rotopros.com. My Twitter handle is @PreachingSense. You can follow us at the RotoPros account. It's at RotoProsDFS. And I think that the next YouTube show will be for Monday. So see you all then.